But I think that's about the only thing. I think that there is no person that is not good at science or math. It's the reason why they think they're not good at science or math most often is because they didn't get a good education at the elementary level. And society just dinned it into their heads that, no, you're not good at it. You can't do this because you got an F in a class.
All right, Dr. Rahul Prasad, welcome to the Tales from the Shift. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Shane.
Very excited to have you. Applied Physicist, you're one of the first. We've had another scientist on, but it's very hard to get scientists on the show. I think you all are very busy.
That is true. And also, I think most scientists do not like to be in front of cameras.
Really?
Yeah. If you've met a scientist, you've probably met an introverted person, one who likes to do their work in private and talk to other people who speak their same language. There are very few, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, that can actually communicate what they're doing, which is very esoteric, very abstract, to the public at large, and also make it funny and entertaining and interesting. And that's what we need to do if we want to get more kids excited to get into science.
Why don't you just tell us, what is a basic overview of what an applied scientist is? Applied physicist.
So physics is obviously the study of everything around us, the natural world. That's physics. That's in a broad sense. Applied physics generally appears when you're dealing with topics which have some application. So, for example, what we're doing right now, when in the last century, in the 20th century, when they first discovered the quanta and quantum physics, that was physics, because nobody knew what you were going to do with it. But today, we are making quantum devices that are potentially going to be used in quantum computing, which is a very applied technique. The same way as developing the transistor back in the middle of the 20th century was clearly a topic of physics. But once it got developed, it became applied physics. And then you can go and you can use that building block to do other things. So that's where applied physics comes in.
Okay, so why did you choose to become a physicist? How did that process end up happening for you personally?
It happened actually back in July of 1969. I went with my father to the American Embassy in New Delhi, which is where I was born and was growing up. And we went to watch the moon landing. And we were watching it on TV, and I see Neil Armstrong put his first foot on the ground, and in the moon, rather, I should say. And I turned to my father and I said, what did Neil Armstrong do in order to become the first man on the moon? And he looks at me, an economist and civil servant, no idea about physics or what went in, and said, oh, he's a physicist. And that stuck with me.
Is that true?
It's not true.
Okay.
No.
I didn't think it was true, but I just wanted to...
He was a test pilot.
Okay.
Which is what you would have to be in order to do something as crazy as sit astride a rocket and ride to the moon. I mean, if you think about it, and particularly in the days when computers weren't really a thing, it was all the calculations were done by hand, and he famously wanted to have humans check the calculations because at the time computers had started coming in, but he didn't trust them. So that's how I got into physics. And, the other aspect of it is that I've always been curious about how things work. And so getting into physics, I was finding out how things work. Why does light bend? Why does it break up into different colors? All these natural phenomena that happen around us, I now had a way of finding out how that happens. And so that's how I got into physics.
I'm showing here you ended up at Yale in order to go to school?
That is correct. Yep. That is where I did my PhD.
Okay. So you did your bachelor's degree in
India at a place called St. Stephen's College in New Delhi.
And then you came over to do your PhD. Okay.
Correct.
Good. Excellent. And then after graduation, where did you work? Where were some of the places you went to?
Well, I started off actually working right at Yale University. Another very interesting thing, as it happened at the time I was married, my wife was also in the same applied physics department that I was in. She was doing her PhD on medical physics, and I was doing it on vacuum arcs. And we were both trying to find a job in the same city. And not having much luck. But she had a job to stay on at Yale and teach, and I didn't have anything. So I was in the elevator with a mechanical engineering professor who I knew at the time. And he asked me, why are you looking so glum? And I said, well, because I can't find a job in the same city as my wife, and that's going to be a problem when I graduate in a few months. He said, what do you know about chaos theory? I said, nothing. He said, do you want to find out? Because I don't know either. He was launching a new program where he was going to study chaos theory and apply it to turbulent fluid flows in order to understand turbulence better. So before we arrived at our destination on the 5th floor of the building, I had a job. And that was my first job, was a research job, learning about chaos theory, fractal geometry, and how to apply it to the study of fluids. And then shortly thereafter, I moved back into applied physics, the study of electrical discharges and arcs and X-ray production with arcs, because we both, my wife and I, decided we were coming to California and moved to the Bay Area. So I worked for a large company where we were working on simulating the effects of a nuclear weapon detonation without actually destroying a weapon or creating any of the harmful radiation, the other radiation. We were just looking at the X-rays because at the time we had the satellites were going up in space, which are going to be the eyes in the sky. And the fear was that somebody could send up a nuclear weapon, detonate it close to the satellite, but not have to hit the satellite. And the amount of X-rays that you produce would destroy all the electronics. So you had to make electronics that were going to withstand these X-rays. And we could do that without detonating a weapon by making an electrical discharge. So I did that. Then worked for a small startup and decided that, why work in a startup and make somebody else rich when we could do it ourselves? And so 3 of us decided we were going to form our own startup. We left the old startup and we formed our own one, where we actually made a product where we were making X-rays for lithography, which is producing chips. But it turns out that we were way ahead of our time and nobody really wanted the product. So that sort of didn't quite work out. And I decided to go work for the Lawrence Livermore National Lab working in nuclear fusion, which is basically trying to understand the processes that go on in the sun and duplicating that in order to make energy, peaceful energy and bountiful energy, and without having the bad effects of nuclear fission, which would then produce all the radioactive waste and does not produce any radioactive waste. Unfortunately, that's also a program that is taking a very long time to come to practicality, as you all know, but it's making good steps. It's actually there where we have now made more energy out than was put into the reaction. And so we're on the verge of making it truly practical.
When do you think it might be practical?
Well, that's a good question. In 1982, when I arrived at Yale to do my PhD, there was some interest in nuclear fusion, and one of the folks there was studying it. So I asked him, when is it going to be practical? He told me very confidently, 20 years. Then I got into doing work in nuclear fusion in 2002, and I asked my colleagues, when will it be practical? Very confidently, they told me, 20 years. We're sitting now in 2026, and I will very confidently tell you, in 20 years.
I hope you're not wrong.
Well, the problem really is when you try to do something which is so out of the depth of knowledge that we have as a society, as a culture, you encounter unexpected problems. And it's very difficult to schedule miracles. And I say that only partially tongue-in-cheek, because a lot of the stuff that you do in order to actually duplicate the processes that are happening in the sun in a controlled fashion on Earth is truly miraculous almost. But in order to make that one miracle happen, there's many little miracles that are needed along the way. And to say that you know how to schedule these is basically being totally arrogant.
So the process, it'll happen eventually. It's just
it'll happen eventually.
You don't know the timeline necessarily.
It's difficult to guesstimate the timeline. And then you can only guesstimate the timeline based on what you know today, but you never know what you don't know until you actually discover, oops, here's something which we never thought was going to happen. And it happens. It's the story of a man walking on a plateau. When he's walking far away from the edge, he thinks land is limitless. He arrives at the precipice, and then he sees, well, there is land on the other side, but there's this cliff. And I got to go down it, and then I got to cross the river and climb it up again. But he wasn't able to see that from the distance. You only discover it when you arrive at it. And it's the same thing with the whole business of generating energy from nuclear fusion.
Yeah. Well, you're making me regret that this isn't a science podcast at this point, because you've already said so many things that I'd rather talk an hour about. You said just chaos theory alone. When you said that, I'm like, well, I would imagine you could just go on and on these subjects and really entertain the hell out of us.
I probably could.
All right, Rahul. Let's talk. Let me ask you this. So let's say a high school student is watching this and they're thinking, hey, this sounds pretty cool. What would you recommend to them? What would be the best path to becoming a physicist?
Well, first thing, don't get discouraged by the physics education in your high school. Because a lot of times, high school physics is not taught the way I would like to teach it, or I would like to have it taught by people. Because physics is the science of the natural world. And the principles of physics, the laws of physics, the equations of physics can all be explained with looking at phenomena that happen in everyday life. And instead of teaching it from a book, from a textbook, it should be done in a hands-on demonstrative way. So that's kind of the first thing. So if you get past that, the best thing to do is to then go on to college and get a bachelor's degree in physics. But don't forget math, because math is always necessary when you actually come down to solving equations. So it's absolutely necessary. And last but not least, you got to have some level of understanding of computer science in the sense of programming, because you're using computers these days. Without them, you really can't do any physics whatsoever. So that would be what I would suggest. The other thing I would suggest is find a lab or a research center that's in wherever you are, or even right one that is far away, and get an internship. Go shadow a physicist and see what their daily job is like. You will find people who are doing physics sometimes will be doing research, sometimes will be doing teaching. In other times, what they're doing is actually more applied, where they're actually building a product alongside a handful of engineers. So that's an interdisciplinary team that comes in. So the best way to find out, and this is true not just of physics, but of any profession, you don't really know what it is until you can actually get to see someone. I didn't have a father who was a physicist, so I couldn't see him. I found out by going to the lab and playing with things that I really enjoyed figuring things out.
You made me think when you said don't get discouraged by high school. I can only imagine the amount of teachers in a high school that have actual experience as a physicist must be virtually nothing.
Virtually nothing.
So here they're nothing. Just, they're reading from this book or trying, understand is, on a cursory level, but how are you going to get someone excited about something you've never actually done?
That's exactly part of the problem. And I think the other part of the problem is we have not valued teachers highly enough, I think, as a society, as a result of which the best and the brightest people don't choose teaching as the profession. We, in fact, even go so far as to have, aphorisms like those who can do, those who can't teach. To me, that's absolutely ridiculous, because when you actually have a person that knows what they're doing teach you, they're much, much better at it than a person who's doing it in the abstract. Think about it in a completely different scenario. If you go to the gym and you have a personal trainer, would you rather have a personal trainer who can actually lift the dumbbells themselves and show you how to do it? Or would you rather have a personal trainer who says, if you do blah, 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 it'll happen. Trust me. I read about it in a book. It seemed to work.
Yeah. I absolutely 100% agree with you. I don't know if I teach air traffic controllers, but I used to be one. So I just can't imagine someone, picking up a book and, so exactly. It says here you have to turn the airplanes. And they it would be a nightmare. I mean, the places be running into each other, if you try to teach that way. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I think they need to be paid a lot more, teachers. Absolutely.
And I think more than even paying, I think it's the respect the society has to offer them. It should be a profession. If you're in a crowd of people at a party or something like that, and somebody introduces themselves and comes down to what is your profession? And people say they're a teacher. People around them don't look at them and go, oh my God, that's amazing. If somebody walks in the room and says, I'm an astronaut, everybody goes, oh my gosh, wow, that's fantastic. Well, teachers are just as important or more because they're raising the next generation.
All right, tell me this. Is there anything that you may have had to give up to be successful in this career?
Well, I think there's always something that you have to give up, because in any career, if you really truly want to be successful, you have to work hard at it. And there's only 24 hours in a day. So something's got to give. There were times when I used to kid, when we just had started a young family, I used to kid, I have a 9-to-5 job. I go to work at 9 a.m., I come back home at 5 p.m., I interact with the kids, put the kids to bed, and I go back to work at 9 p.m., and I come back at 5 a.m. to catch a few hours of sleep, and then go back and start the whole cycle again. So, yes, I did give up a lot of sleep. But, sleep, I think, is overrated. When I'm 6 feet under, I'll have all eternity to catch up.
Do you feel like coming to the United States, do you feel like that was maybe a sacrifice in order to get involved with this?
No, not for me. I mean, I think some people, it might be, but not for me. The reason was that I was so passionately involved in physics that I knew that I wanted to do this. And I looked around, actually, when I was an undergraduate, I looked around for graduate education worldwide and came to the conclusion that the US was the best choice. Of course, it made it easier that it was English language instruction, not German, because I spoke English perfectly well, but I certainly did not speak any German whatsoever. So that would have been tough. But even other than that, it just is a place where the best and the brightest come. And I wanted to be taught by people who were the best and the brightest in their field. That was the only thing that I was looking for. I was not looking for age. I was not looking for sex. I was not looking for anything else. The only thing that occurred to me is this person highly respected? And they were. Also, while it was coming away from home, that was not a bad thing for me whatsoever, because I didn't have the best time as a child in the first place. So this was a good, clean start and a new beginning, and it was great. People saw me for who I am, nothing else.
Awesome. If you were to close your eyes and picture a physicist in your mind, what does this person look like? What kind of personality would you say they have?
A large number, I should say, of physicists have a very intense personality. They are very focused on what they do, and they focus so much of their time doing that they tend to forget that there are other things in life that make a human being. So they oftentimes are not terribly comfortable around other people. You can imagine a loner, a person who likes to communicate, but in the language of physics, not in day-to-day English. So if you're not a physicist, if you don't understand the jargon, you're going to get left behind. And they tend also, because they value their time so much and what they're doing so highly, they tend also to not want to spend any time trying to explain what they're doing to anybody else, which I think is actually deleterious to the growth of physics, because physics grows not only by the people who are doing the physics research, but by society who chooses to fund that research. And I think we're seeing some of that in terms of the way in which we have in the US, science funding, more generally speaking, is being threatened. And the reason it's being threatened is because people don't understand, what is my dollar doing? I'm spending all this money, I'm giving it to the government in my taxes, and they're going out and giving it to these scientists, and I don't understand what they're doing with this money. And so scientists need to take a step back and say, we need to communicate with the public to show them what it is we're doing and why it's important. It's not because I'm going to get a great amount of knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's because of the practical applications that come.
All right. Would you say that there's a type of person that this career might not be for? Any type of personality or anything?
Well, I think if you don't want to get into the details of something, if you're not a person that wants to pay attention to details, that could be a problem. Because you really have to, if you want to do research in physics, you really have to be willing to focus on that for at least a period of time until you solve the problem that you're solving, or until you complete the task that you're doing. And you can't be saying, well, that's too complicated, I don't want to do it. You're going to have challenges, and you're just going to have to approach them. But I think that's about the only thing. I think that there is no person that is not good at science or math. It's the reason why they think they're not good at science or math most often is because they didn't get a good education at the elementary level. And society just dinned it into their heads that, no, you're not good at it. You can't do this because you got an F in a class. I was tutoring math when I was a high school student, and there was this middle schooler that just couldn't understand trigonometry. And he was failing math, and that was what he was doing. And I asked him, when I was tutoring him the first time, instead of getting into anything else, I said, so what do you like to do in your spare time? He said, I like to fly a kite. And I said, well, what do you do when you fly a kite? He said, well, we do battle with other people who are flying kites, and we try to cut the string of the other person's kite so then they don't have a kite. And I get it because I won it fair and square. I said, okay, good. Would you like to know how high the other kite is flying? Or how much of a rope do you need in order to get to the other kite? He said, absolutely. So, well, let's talk trigonometry. That's how you figure out how much rope you're going to need. Do you have enough string? Is this kite flying so far that it's useless? It's not going to work. So save your energy, do something else. Kid got a B-. All because I was able to connect to what was interesting to him. And he suddenly grasped that math was actually not an abstract concept. It was something that was useful to him in his fun time.
Yeah. Well, I can see why you understand also why teachers are important, because now you've admitted that you've actually done some teaching yourself. So you've been on that side of that coin.
Yes. It's the only way I think you can do it is to, and of course, what I'm talking about is very individualized, but it doesn't have to be. You can even have it, you can take the same approach in a larger scale as well, where you're teaching 20 or 30 kids. Because there's going to be certain things, maybe groups of things. So you can switch from one aspect, one thing that people like, one game that people like to play, or one activity they like to do, and then move it around the class, and that way you get everybody excited and interested.
Okay. After becoming a physicist, is there anything about this career that surprised you that was enjoyable? Something you didn't expect to happen, like a benefit of being in the career or something like that?
Well, not really, except that one side benefit was I wound up getting to travel a lot because, you attend conferences, and physics conferences, just like conferences in other areas, tend to be held in very nice locations. And so it's nice to have that perk of being able to get to vacation in a lovely spot, in addition to doing your work.
All right. Can't argue with that. Can you tell us what is the worst day that you've ever experienced on this job, or the best day?
Well, I can say the worst day was one I thought I wasn't going to come out alive from, because it was actually while I was still a student at Yale. I was building a capacitor bank to store energy to make an electrical discharge. And we had a lab when I was trying to connect a power supply that was going to charge the capacitor bank into the wall's outlet, which is a 440 volt outlet, so high energy, high power. And I used a meter to try to see what the voltage was that was coming out of the wall. And I had not checked whether the meter was faulty or not before I plugged it in. And it was faulty, and it arced across my hands. and I got burned, third-degree burns on both my hands. And I wound up having to be taken in an ambulance to the Yale New Haven Hospital. And the burn surgeon came, and I asked him, I said, so tell me, doc, and lay it out, tell me straight, what's going to happen? He said, best case, worst case. I said, both. Start with best case. Okay. He said, you follow the instructions that I will give you, and you will do the physical therapy that I'm going to recommend, and you're going to do it without complaining. And 10 years from now, when you tell people that you have third-degree burns in your hands, they're going to take one look at your hand and say, you're lying. Worst case, you don't do what I'm going to tell you, you're going to get gangrene. I'm going to have to amputate not your fingers, but your hands. Your call.
So it looks like you did the physical therapy.
Aye, sir. It's what I told him.
Right. Good move. Okay. So that was the worst day. How about a best day?
Best day. I think that there's so many of them. I can't, every time I discovered something, every time I solved a problem, every time I understood, every time I got that aha, now I see it, has been the best day. And that's the reason why I kept doing it. Because there's just so many of these best days. Every day I'd think, oh, this is obviously the best day. And then next day, tomorrow would kind of roll around and it was a better day. And then day after tomorrow, oh yeah, this is the best day. And you go, okay, now how do I catalog the best day?
Okay. Well, so maybe it'll be tough to say what is the absolute best. But I mean, I'm sure in your mind right now, there's something that you remember that you really made you happy.
Absolutely. I think that the first time when we were trying to put together a little vacuum arc that we wanted to see if we were able to get some thrust out of it so it could be used as a micro thruster for satellite applications. And we actually were able to get visible movement. That was one of the best days. Another really great, so we actually proved the concept that this little arc, this little electrical spark could actually move a satellite. Now, of course, it wasn't a whole satellite. We moved a tiny, tiny, tiny little thing. Then, of course, we scaled it and all the rest of it. But initially, the idea that you could actually move something by just creating a spark was quite novel. And so that was very exciting. And another very exciting day was when I was able to create a sheet of laser light by taking a laser beam, focusing it on a mirror, and rotating the mirror faster than the pulsing rate of the light. So instead of having, and you see them now, it's an application that you see all the time when you go to any concert, you see those laser sheets. That was one of the things that I worked on when I was a researcher at Yale, right after my PhD. That was exciting. What is that called? And it's just it's called a laser sheet, and it's produced with a laser. And I wanted to do it because I was studying turbulence, and I didn't want to study the fluorescence with a single beam of light. I wanted to have the whole plane illuminated. Rather than have 1,000 laser beams, I figured I'll use the one and move it. Cool. And it still gives me a kick every time I go to a concert and I see the lasers moving.
And you tell people, hey, I worked on that.
I did that.
Awesome. Okay. Hey, quick time out. I just want to say that if you'd like to come on the show, email me at talesfromtheshiftpodcast@gmail.com. We'll talk about your shift. In the middle of being a physicist, halfway through the amount of years that you did do that, did you ever think twice about being a physicist?
Many, many years ago, I came to the conclusion that you don't give up just because of one bad day. Because you're going to have bad days. What you do is you start analyzing patterns. So if you find that there's one bad day and you don't want to go to work the next day, don't worry about it. Go to work the next day. If you then wake up day after tomorrow and you still have a bad day, go to work. Don't worry about it. The third bad day, you got to take a step back and see what's going on here. What's causing these bad days in a row? Is it something that you're doing, or is it something out of your control? If you come up with the answer of something you're doing, then you know how to fix it. You can change something which will not lead to this outcome. But if it's something which is beyond your control, that's when you got to start thinking, okay, maybe it's time to walk away. And I never had 3 bad days in a row until the tail end of my career. So here we are.
I don't know if I know Thomas Edison has been quoted as saying this. I don't know if he came up with it though, where essentially it's, you can fail, right? I fail and I fail and I fail, but there's nothing wrong with that because that tells you how not to do it. Right?
Exactly.
So now we've eliminated this. We've eliminated this. Great. It's actually, in a weird way, it's a success, right?
It is a success. It is absolutely a success because it's narrowed the possibilities of what you need to do in order to succeed. So, if you get lucky, you're going to succeed the first time around. But you've got to be really lucky to do that. But every time you fail, you learn something.
Reproducibility.
And then you do. You will not be able to reproduce that.
Right. Okay. How about this? Would you be willing to reveal a time when maybe you made a mistake or something embarrassing in this career?
Sure. Oh, sure. This is way back when I was a graduate student again, and there was a liquid nitrogen tank that needed replacement because we were cooling things down and we used the liquid nitrogen to achieve very low temperatures. And I was very lucky that there was another student in the lab at the time. He noticed what I was doing. And I thought because the tank was empty, somebody had already turned the valve that allows gas to come out of the cylinder off, but I didn't check it. And I went to start to unhook the hose. And my fellow graduate student shouted and said, "Hey, hold on. Have you checked that the valve is turned off?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Check it." And I checked it and it was open. Now, had I proceeded to unhook the hose, there was still some gas in the tank. It would have come out. And it would have probably hit me, which would have caused liquid nitrogen burns. And my first burn, the electrical burn, would have been supplanted by something significantly worse. So that was not good. But it did teach me a very valuable lesson. It is very useful to double check, to go through how things could go wrong, just as often as how things can go right. When we plan, we always plan for success. And it's true not just in physics, but in all aspects of life. We always plan for success. But it really does behoove us to spend a moment to see how things could go wrong. And if they go wrong, are they going to be catastrophically wrong? Or are they going to be something that you can recover from wrong?
So if someone's a physicist, what other jobs might that lead to? I would assume teaching in a college or what are some other things?
Absolutely. So, there's obviously the teaching in a college. There's obviously the research which they're doing in an academic lab or a government lab or a lab in a company. But they could also switch into the production side of things and manage production because they've got such a wonderful knowledge of the workings of things that they can do that. Also now, if your physics involves a lot of math and a lot of computation, you can get into the analytical side of the financial markets. I actually had a number of colleagues that while they were doing a PhD in the same field, roughly speaking, as me, moved on early on and went into finance as the analysts because they understand equations, they understand modeling, and they could do it just as well as anybody that came with an economics background. Because, picking up the economics is not that difficult. Picking up the ability to solve equations is more difficult to do on the fly. So that's another thing that you could do. And, personally, I think when you've done something which involves solving a problem once, something that nobody had done before, you can do anything you want. Because when you walked into that lab to do your first experiment, you did not know how to do it. You figured it out. You got the answer. You went back in the next year and you did it again for another class. Well, if you've done that twice or 3 times during your career as a physicist, why do you think you can't do it in a completely different field? Because you had to learn things that you didn't know when you walked in. So I actually think the world is your oyster.
Yeah. Great way to think about it. All right. Everybody always wants to talk about this. AI is obviously a big deal today. What impact do you see AI having on physics itself? Positive, negative?
I think positive. And I think the reason I say positive is because in so many areas of physics, you produce petabytes, terabytes, petabytes of data, which need to be analyzed. And the human brain and the human beings can't do that manually. So having the ability to do it unsupervised, as in AI, would be absolutely fantastic. We're already seeing that in areas like in astrophysics, where they're looking for stars or extraterrestrial objects and things of that type. They're much easier. They can sift through the data much more quickly. And if they know what they're looking for, it's much easier to find those things. In exactly the same way as AI is helping with medicine. I just read this morning about an AI-equipped stethoscope that is finding heart arrhythmias better than any physician. And I think with that, I think it's going to be very helpful. I don't think that the negative is, well, there is a possible negative, and that is that people start trusting what they see with the AI and they don't do the verification. One of the things that we do as researchers in physics is we try to replicate what we've done. We don't just take the one instance, I put 1 in 1 and something happened and that's it. What we like to do is we like to duplicate it over and over again and make sure that it was not some fluke of nature. And I just hope that with the use of AI, people don't think, oh, well, the computer has done this, and computers, like a human, is not fallible. So therefore, it's correct. And we know, at least initially, right now, there is the possibility of hallucinations. If you go into any
Huge
kind of chat
possibility.
GPT or equivalent thing, they'll come up with all manner of things that make absolutely no sense whatsoever.
It's not a possibility. It's a reality. They will lie to you so fast. And I had some issues with, I was using Photoshop. Okay. So how does this menu work? And so I was asking, it goes, oh, you got to click on this in the menu, whatever. And I go, well, that's not there. And it goes, yes, it is. And it shows me a picture of the menu and it created it. Like it just inserted it. It made an image. Said, oh, that's right here. I'm like, that doesn't exist. You just invented this whole thing. Like, what are we doing? So I can't imagine in something so important as your career, as in your work, to just say, oh, yes, this star definitely exists over in here. And, and everybody, oh, okay, we can run with that. I mean, how can you run with that?
If he says so.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that is the one caution that I would definitely insert, that we have to make sure that we're checking, obviously not checking everything, because the old adage of computer science, garbage in, garbage out, is still true.
%.
So, the AI is learning from the data we're giving it, much like a child learns from the instruction we give it. And you can wind up with kids who, go bad because of bad instruction and not because they were bad intrinsically.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about pay. Everybody wants to know about pay. Basically, what can you imagine someone might make as a physicist, maybe at the beginning of their career and going in as they move forward? What do you think?
Well, I think physicists get paid well. There aren't as many jobs necessarily in physics as there are in some of the other areas that you might expect, but you would get paid pretty darn well. I mean, out of a college degree, you'd easily make upwards of $100,000 a year. And if you get yourself a postgraduate education, a master's or a PhD, then you've got the sky's the limit, really. I mean, it isn't so true today, but if you go back 20 years ago, if you looked at all the CEOs of tech companies, almost all of them had the prefix doctor in front of their names. And that's not because they were medical doctors. So, and that's a limitless amount of money you could make there.
All right. Well, people like that. Okay. I don't remember if I asked you this question. How about workplace horror stories? Is there anything that you can remember from doing your work?
Well, you get people who are people. And oftentimes the people who are managing labs aren't always the most organized people. And their labs can be truly like minefields because there are wires strung around, trip hazards everywhere, chemicals that are stored improperly, all kinds of things like that. And if they're the person running the lab, then the people working for them, generally speaking, don't want to say, hey, we're doing this wrong, because that's telling your boss they're wrong. And that's not necessarily, in any area, a great idea. So,
Great.
I've walked into some labs that I feel like, okay, I don't think I want to take another step, because who knows what I'm going to run into.
Right. Okay. What about peers? So you're working with other physicists. What's the interaction like? Supportive, combative?
I think
What do you think?
Generally speaking, it's quite supportive. Because generally speaking, when you're collaborating, you're working on an area, you're trying to get an answer, most people have recognized that one person alone can't get there. So you need other people. You need a team, not just a single person. And so that's the reason why people are collaborating. Now, there's competition. Competition happens everywhere. You got 5 people and they're all at the same level, and they're seeing that there's one promotion coming down the line. Are they going to want to jockey to be in the best position to get that promotion? That's human nature. They will. If there's one gold medal to be had, they're going to compete, whether it's the Olympics or whether it's physics. Same story. That's just human nature.
Yeah. Okay, so in your career, is there anything that made you a more cynical person or maybe a more hopeful person?
Well, I would say both. Cynical, I think maybe I should step back and say it's probably not so much related to being a physicist as becoming older and seeing how people tend to disappoint you. And you think that because they're physicists like you've got a lot of commonality, that somehow they're not going to disappoint you. They still wind up disappointing you. So you start becoming cynical and you start thinking, okay, I'll take that with a grain of salt. Hopeful because of the progress that we've made in so many areas. I mean, I just think about if it wasn't for physics, science, engineering, it wouldn't be possible to be in my lifetime going from having to work with paper and pencil and something they used to call logarithmic tables to do math, to be able to do it on this little supercomputer that I call a phone that I carry in my pocket. And actually even further now, where I can just ask one of these AI chatbots to give me the answer. And I don't even have to take the machine out of my pocket. I just speak and the answer appears. I mean, to me, that's an incredible amount of progress made in a very short span of time. If you look at just about any area in lifespan, everything. So that makes me really hopeful that we're actually going to be able to make people's lives better.
Well, what is something that you're hopeful about as far as physics go that you think might happen? Maybe besides fusion, I know we talked about fusion, but is there anything else on the horizon that you're excited about?
Well, I think quantum computing, which is sort of tangential to physics, is physics because of the nature of the beast. But I think quantum computing is a definite game changer. And optical computing, which is the other thing that they're working on, that's another game changer because you're able to move, you can compute much faster because you're not limited to the speed of electrons in a wire. You're computing essentially at the speed of light.
Yeah. And then all of our passwords go bye-bye. I mean, what's going to happen?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Once you get to that level of computing that you can do, 10 billion computations in a fraction of a second, well, no password is uncrackable. It's a matter of running, just brute force method will work.
Yeah. Well, hopefully people are working on a security concept
ways
there.
To protect us, yes.
Okay. Let's talk about hot take. Is there something that you believe that your colleagues might disagree with?
Good question. Good question. I mean, I don't know. That'd be a very good question.
Okay.
I'll tell you why I'm stumped in some ways is because, all the discussions that I've had, we don't really disagree on anything pertaining to physics. Whenever disagreements come about, it's because of the choice of restaurant we're going for dinner or lunch, or what political party they were voting for, or I was voting for, or something of that type. Disagreements that arrive just by being humans. Physicists are famous for changing their minds about mundane things like what we should order. If there are 5 physicists around a table, you can bet your bottom dollar you have 6 choices. And then you're wondering, wait, somebody must have spoken twice. In the space of everybody else speaking, somebody decided, that doesn't sound so good what I said originally. I'm just going to change my mind.
All right. What about success in this career? How would you define success in this career?
Success is an interesting term because it means different things to different people. To me, I think I define success as having achieved what I set out to do. And if I can get there, or if I can understand why I cannot get there, that's success. So if a project, we decided we were going to do something, we were going to make XYZ, success is when you make it, or when you discover that there really isn't any way to make it, and here are the good reasons why you cannot make it. It's not for the lack of trying, in other words. So that's how I would characterize success here. Success, in other terms, in terms of the personal nature of being a physicist, is what, to me, it's, am I living a full and fulfilled life? Am I happy? Am I pleased to go to work? Am I excited to go to work when I wake up in the morning? Am I roaring to go to work, or am I trying to find a way to hit the snooze button and I'm just going to stay in bed if I can for the next 2 days?
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So let's say someone just got hired. They're a brand new physicist. What might you tell them to definitely do or not do?
Well, definitely do. Definitely interact with your colleagues. And not only people who are working on the project that you're working on, but everybody. Because you never know when you're going to need experience and skills in an area that you don't have. And the quicker you are able to establish who is the expert in what area, the quicker you'll reach the answers that you need to reach. Because if you run into a problem which is not something that you have core competency in, but you've already met Jack and Jane who know how to do that, it's very easy to walk into Jack's office or Jane's office and ask, and you get the answer. On the other hand, if you don't know who has what, when you're stumped is when you're trying to find out, okay, who can help? And that's not the time to start looking for help. It's much better to be armed with the knowledge. So that's something I would definitely say that you should do. The second thing, which is on the flip side, don't do, which is don't bottle up your mistakes. Don't be afraid to seek help. If something goes wrong, something doesn't work according to plan, try to figure it out. If it doesn't work quickly, if you can't figure it out quickly, ask for help. Much better to ask for help and put 2 brains together where one is not succeeding than to just keep trying to do the same thing that you just did and expect a different answer. Because as Einstein once said, that's the surest sign of madness. To do the same thing over and over again and expect a different answer.
All right, cool. Is there a specific person, a situation, or an experiment that you still think about today?
An experiment that I think, situation, many. Again, one of those things which there's quite a few. So if I think about experiment, I think that's probably a good one, which was when we were trying to, it wasn't my experiment, it was actually the experiment of another of my colleagues. And they were trying to make a laser, but a laser that didn't function on invisible light, but in X-rays. And the first time they actually saw an X-ray laser, when they actually made that happen, I still think about that. That was pretty special. I was just in the lab at the time.
So I'm trying to wrap my brain on it. So it's a laser that's going through things then?
Yes,
using
exactly.
X-ray.
It's X-rays, exactly. So it's all the same principles as a laser, which means it's a very focused beam of light. It doesn't diverge, very intense, and can travel very long distances. But normally we think of it as light. That's your laser. And that's why L is for light. And if you make that with X-rays, now you've got X-rays that are not just dispersing, but are actually traveling long distances in a straight line.
What would be the practical use of this?
Oh, it's just cool to do. Sometimes it's fun to do. Sometimes it's fun to do stuff just for the sake of doing it. I mean, I think I'm being a little facetious. There are obviously applications, and imaging is one application, because if you had, and you'd have to dial it down, but for example, if you take an X-ray, one of the things that causes blurring in an X-ray is the fact the X-rays are spreading out. And the thicker the body that is traveling through, the more they spread out, and then they interfere with each other, and so you get blurred shapes. Now, if your X-rays stayed parallel and focused, then you'd be able to get much clearer imaging. That's one possible application.
Why don't you tell us about that and how you got involved? So
I got involved because, as a lot of these things happen, it was just purely and simply happenstance. I got involved because a friend of mine was working as a volunteer for Butterflies USA, one of the organizations that I'm now involved with, while I was working at the National Lab. And he said he's making a video in order to conduct a campaign to raise funds for the organization so that they could send it to India, where they work with the street children in the city of New Delhi. And I thought it was an admirable thing to do. And he said, well, I've got this video and I've got a translation, but I'm not sure it's very accurate, because a person speaks for a long time and I get 2 words as a translation. And I just somehow don't think that English is that efficient that what you would say in Hindi over the course of 1 or 2 sentences can be distilled into 1 or 2 words. So can you listen to it, and can you tell me if it's correct or not? And I did. And at the end of that, he says, well, I like the sound of your voice. Can I ask you to narrate the video? And I said, well, I've never narrated anything, forget a video. And he says, no, I think you're going to be just fine. Try it. And I was reticent, but I asked myself, why not? What's the downside? If I do it and I suck, he's not going to use it. So that's no problem. If I do it and it's good, then I've helped them out. And that's great. So I decided to do it. That was about 15 years ago. And I routinely every year do the voiceover, the narration for one Butterflies video. That's how I got into it. And the enjoyment I got, the satisfaction that I got that I was helping raise money for these children in India. And then I visited, because I was visiting India, and I visited Butterflies in India, and I talked to some of the children. And just hearing their stories, just hearing the joy in their voices for what they were learning, what they were getting from interacting with Butterflies. So Butterflies helps children go from, street children mainly, to stay in school, to be able to do their homework, to be able to learn something about money management, something about saving money, because they're all doing odd jobs here and there. They're getting money, so they need to have some sort of financial literacy. And then to prepare them if they want to go to college, or to help them find vocational training so they can learn some trade and then be responsible, earning citizens. Just talking to these kids, and in particular, there was one where they were telling me about this cooperative bank that had been set up, and they were just so excited. They couldn't stop trying to talk over each other to tell me how this bank was run. And I had to keep stopping them and asking them to speak one at a time, because I could understand them if they were speaking one at a time, not 4 and 5 and 6 over each other. And that really gave me a lot of joy. So that's why when they asked, would you like to join the board of Butterflies? I said, sure. And then I was on the board of Butterflies, and I was talking about it to other friends, and a mutual friend said, hey, there's a person who's doing this in South Africa and needs to raise money in the US because they're running out of money to be able to expand the programs. And it's very similar to what they do in Butterflies. They're working with children in Cape Town, in the Philippines, area of Cape Town, and they're trying to help them in the same way they're helping in India. So I sat down with him to tell him how we raise money and with butterflies. And he says, well, that's all very great and dandy. Would you mind helping me set up the organization here in the US and lead it? And so I said, sure, I think that's a great idea. I'll help you. And that's how I got into philanthropy. And as I started seeing the results of what the work was being done, it was much more of an instant gratification where I could see the impact on the kids right away. And I could see that I was making a difference in their lives in my presence, as opposed to what I was doing as a full-time physicist in nuclear fusion, which will do the same thing, and even on a greater scale, but probably not in my lifetime. So I would have done all this work, but I wouldn't see the fruit of it. And at this point in my life, I decided, it's time to try something different. And that's when I got in full-time into working as a volunteer for philanthropic organizations.
So can you just back up for a second? I guess I don't understand what the word butterflies has to do with it. What does that mean?
So Butterflies is the name of the organization in India. And the reason why it's called Butterflies is because the childhood of children is short and fleeting, just like the lifespan of a butterfly. And so nurture it while you can.
Right. Got it. Very cool.
And I have for a long, long time believed that if you give children the right tools, if you give them the right opportunities, you're going to see incredibly brilliant discoveries made. And they don't have to be made by people who were born with the proverbial silver spoon in their mouths. It could be somebody who was born in utter destitution. You just have to make sure that they get the same opportunities that are given to other people who can afford them.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, there's a lot of poor people in India. I mean, how many children can you even let in? I mean, I would imagine it would be...
This is true. This is true. So one of the things that we try to do in India is we do as best we can. And certainly it's the tip of the iceberg. But we also are very free to share our successes with other organizations that are trying to do the same thing. So if they feel like they can use what we have learned, if they feel like they can use the structures that we have developed, more power to them. Because we would love to see the message expand. So one of the things that we're working on right now is something that we call cooperative learning, which is actually very similar to the Montessori way of teaching that we're all familiar with in the US, where the children teach each other. The slightly older kids teach the slightly younger kids and so on. And it's been very successful in the city of Delhi. And now it's been expanded by this way of sharing through a half a dozen states, provinces in India. And so that's the hope, that we'd be able to engender change, not just locally, but by inspiring other people to do the same thing.
So you have the book Impact Shift.
Impact Shift, which is the book I just wrote, that's the title. Subtitle is The Art of Pivoting for Meaningful Change. And it came about because I have done this shift from being a physicist to being a philanthropist. And I wanted to share my story, how I did it, and provide simple things that anybody can do, anybody can follow, if they're so desiring to do so. So if they choose to make a shift from their current career, and it doesn't have to be physics, and physics to philanthropy is one possibility, but it could be anything, finance to philanthropy or what have you, medicine. When your career is not giving you what you're desiring, not everything that you're desiring, and if you want something else, something which is going to be more meaningful to you, and you want to change, this is the way to do it. And the art of pivoting comes in because you can't just one day say, hey, I'm tired of what I'm doing. I'm going to stop and I'm going to do this other thing. And I really have no idea what this other thing is, but that's it. I'm doing it. You can do that. You can jump into the deep blue sea, but without learning how to swim, that probably isn't going to end very well. So the art of pivoting, and that's where the book talks about this, is how to dip your toe in little micro pivots. So you don't just make a clean break and go 180 off, but you actually go little by little, test the waters while you continue to do what you're doing, so that you have a basis, a firm grounding, firm footing. You're not feeling like you're floundering. And you're learning about this new area and testing it out for size. And if it looks like it's something you want to do, then you get further involved with it. And of course, you still have only 24 hours in the day. So at some point in time, you're going to have to start cutting back on your old profession. And then at some further point in time, maybe make a clean break or not. A lot of people choose to continue to dabble in what they were doing by doing consultancy jobs, things of that type, where you're not giving the full-time effort and full-time attention, and you're doing it part-time, occasionally. It's basically what the book is about. It's available on Amazon. It's an ebook, paperback, and hardback, and shortly it is going to be available in audio format as well.
Are you going to narrate it?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Very good. Let's talk about, we had a previous guest on, Amy Weldon. She's a science communication writer, and she has some questions for you that she was excited to ask. So hopefully people will get some out of this. The first one she asked is, what would you say to people who are intimidated by physics or maybe do not think they're smart enough to understand or appreciate it?
Okay. First thing I would say is, yes, physics can be intimidating, but it is not intimidating, really speaking, because what is physics? It's the understanding of the natural world. And you don't have to be terribly smart to understand it. You don't have to have a genius level IQ or anything like that. You just have to have the desire to understand and a desire to learn. That's all you really need. So I would say anybody can do it.
Okay. Well, her follow-up
You just
question
have to have
was,
an interest.
the question was, what or where should an everyday person start to gain an appreciation for physics? What would be a way they might do it?
Well, if one simple way to do it is pick up a How It Works series book. At least in the old days, this is what we used to do when I was a kid. Those are the most fascinating books I ever read, How It Works. And it is just one thing after another, natural phenomenon after another that is being explained. And over time, you realize what they're doing is actually teaching you physics principles, because that's how the world works. Einstein didn't come up with the theory of relativity just because that was a fun thing to do. It was because he was trying to explain how gravity works. Newton didn't come up with his laws just for the hell of it. If any time you think of any aspect of physics, it's a law, a rule, an equation that explains the natural world around us.
Okay, one last question for Amy. She says, are physicists usually more optimistic than those in other disciplines? Why or why not?
Well, I think they are. I think because we're dealing with the natural world and things which are really happening around us. So when you understand it, you start to understand the meaning of life in a lot of ways. Why are we here? The early physicists were, after all, called natural philosophers, which is, physics and philosophy is not that far removed. It's all about logic and searching for meaning. So I think naturally that inclines us to be optimistic.
Okay, Rahul, I know you're into photography and also somehow, and you're also an explorer. So can you tell about that? I'm really excited to hear about that.
Absolutely. So I've been a photographer for pretty much the whole of my life. I was about a 4 or 5 year old kid when I picked up an old camera that my father wasn't using, and I'd walk around trying to take imaginary pictures. So I got into photography when I was in school, film photography, and fortunately we had a photography club, so I got into using the darkroom. I was able to develop my own little photos, and that's just stayed with me. It's a way in which I get to express what I see and what I see in the natural world. So it's sort of an extension of what I do with physics, trying to explain what's happening in the natural world. This is my way of recording what I'm seeing in the natural world. I also wound up using photography in my research work, because a lot of the work that I've done has involved photographing things like fluid flows, which I was doing when I was at Yale, and so on and so forth. And that passion has just continued. And I love photographing wildlife. in particular, and nightlife. Those two things I really like to do. Nightlife, because my knowledge of physics and my knowledge of optics and how light works is very helpful for making good photographs. One of the interesting little anecdotes I'd like to share is a friend of mine said, you have this really nice photo of the Golden Gate Bridge, but it's got so many cars on it. It looks kind of cluttered. You should use Photoshop and erase the cars. I said, no, I don't need to do that. I can make a photo without actually doing anything that you're suggesting. And I went off to the same location where I'd taken the shot, mounted my camera on a tripod, and I took a very long exposure photograph of the bridge. Well, the cars disappear because they're emitting light only for a very short period of time, but the long exposure just blurs them out completely. And you get this beautiful photo where you have streaks of light and the bridge. And I was able to create that because I understood the laws of optics or physics.
Yeah.
So that's where the photography comes in. And I just love, as I told you earlier, try to figure out how the world works and things of that type, which got me interested in physics. But then that's also what's gotten me interested in traveling. And I love to travel. And that's where I'm an explorer. I like to go to the far reaches of the globe, travel all 7 continents. And hopefully I'm going to continue to do that. And it's, again, another way I learn. And I learn about different cultures, different places. It's all about why. Why is this the way it is? That's been my eternal quest.
Yeah. Very cool. Have you heard of the Viking science ships that you can take?
Yes.
That comes out of... Yeah. So north, whoever's watching, maybe they've never heard of it, but you depart from someplace in North America, usually there's a place in Minnesota, actually. I forget which city. And you go all the way to Antarctica on the ships, right?
Yes.
And there's even a submarine in there that you can go out on, and all these adventures, and you're always stopping at different places and going out and doing some scientific stuff. Very, very cool. Yeah. I want to do it, but it's quite expensive.
Yes. Yes, those are very expensive.
I'm glad you told me about the photography. I've seen some of your pictures, and I'll definitely put some of them. I mean, we're talking right now. They're probably on the screen as people are watching this, but so I'll make sure to include all those.
Sounds good.
What would you say is, adventure-wise, is probably the most off the beaten path, interesting place that you've been?
Well, that would have to be, it's a toss-up between Africa and the Arctic. So we went on this small ship. It was an expedition ship, an icebreaker, 12 passengers, 10 crew, trying to go up as far north. And we went up to just about 85 degrees north. And we saw polar bears in their natural habitat. And that was just stunning. It was a 10-day expedition where we had no internet. The first day was really strange. I kept reaching for my phone to see, why is there no notification? Why is it blank? Why is there a blank screen? And then it was incredibly peaceful. No news. It's just absolutely amazing. It's no news. It's like going back to the times of the early explorers that set sail and didn't know what they were going to find. So that was absolutely exciting. And in Africa, it's sort of similar when you go into these wildlife reserves, and you're in the wild and you're living in tents and you're seeing all these incredible sights. Incredible, nature is just so wonderful. And then you see all the various aspects. You see animals being born. You see animals feeding on each other. You see all kinds of different things. And you see the whole circle of life right there in front of your eyes in a 10, 12, 15-day trip. And it's just fascinating. So I would say those have been two of the best.
Okay. We're on the speed round now. So this has been very hit or miss. So if it doesn't go well, it's not your fault. I guarantee you. So basically,
we'll give it a shot.
I will say something and then you will tell me what you think about it, whatever. And we'll just move quickly through these. Peer review.
I think it's important. It's very important. I think it's the way in which you stay true to what you're trying to do. Because it's very easy to get caught up in the emotion of what you're doing. and you think you've got it right. And I always think of cold fusion when I think of that, because there's this researcher that thinks he's got cold fusion and he's going to make this limitless energy and he's not going to have to put any energy into it, and never had it peer reviewed. And then all of a sudden, Time magazine is writing about it and all the rest of it. And other researchers are saying, we can't reproduce any of these results. What's going on here? So I think peer review is very important.
Yeah. Okay. Dark matter.
A big unknown. And I think could very well, as we start to understand it, become a limitless source of energy. You just don't know what you don't know.
So currently, the belief is that there's more of that than anything. Is that
Yes.
Is that a true statement? Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. And so in theory, how might that be tapped into for an energy source?
Don't know. But when there's so much of it and matter and energy are equivalent, there's a lot of energy out there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The LHC, Large Hadron Collider.
That's an amazing piece of physics. Absolutely awesome. And it really goes into trying to understand the fundamental nature of particles, and then smaller and smaller particles, the building blocks of nature. And while it may not seem that there's a clear application of it, the very fact that you know how things work then allow you to put things together and make things that you otherwise didn't think possible.
Okay. All right. Superconductors.
Superconductors are amazing. Again, they're being used all the time. If you ever have had MRI, the big magnet is possible because of superconductors. It wouldn't be possible otherwise. So MRI would not be possible. And MRI is an absolutely fascinating thing. You're actually able to look inside of a human being without slicing them open.
Okay. Fermi Lab.
Fermi Labs is a great place where they do a lot of that accelerator physics, kind of like what they do with the Large Hadron Collider. And it's a remarkable institution. I think very, very highly of it.
Well, it's on the list because I live fairly close to there. But when you talk about dark matter, I think that they, correct me if I'm wrong, officially discovered it, but then they had to pass it on to
yes.
LHC perhaps in order to confirm it, I think is kind of
exactly.
How it went down. Okay.
You have to confirm it. It goes back all the way to peer review. If one group of people finds something, the best way to verify whether it's true or not is to have another group of people, independent of the first group, try to do the same thing. If they get similar results, then it must be true. If they get dissimilar results, it could have been a fluke.
How about the butterfly effect?
Butterfly effect is pretty amazing because you're talking about what happens as an unintended consequence. The flight of butterflies is not intending to change the weather. They didn't get up one day and say, we're going to change the weather in such and such a city. But what they're doing, through a cascade of effects, changes things downstream. In some ways, you can think about it as the law of unintended consequences. You have no idea that you're going to do this thing, but it's just going to have a cascade effect. And something completely great or horrific might happen. What it's doing is it's changing, if they start to fly, all of them start to fly, the monarchs all start to fly, they change the way in which the plants that they're sitting on would live and breathe and interact with the world, which could then change what happens with animals and so on and so forth. So it's a cascade through what they're doing to the environment around them in their small little sphere.
Final question. What is a secret that most people don't know about being a physicist?
Good question. Very good question. I think most people don't realize that a physicist is just the same as anybody else. We're human beings just like everybody else, and we live and breathe and eat and feel the same way. And there's nothing really terribly special about being a physicist other than the fact that you're curious.
Well, I think it's special in that it's a very cool career. So from an outsider's perspective.
Yes, it certainly is. I have no regrets whatsoever. If I had to do it all over again, I would do it all over again the same way.
You wouldn't go down a different path of the sciences?
Probably not. Probably not. The only other pathways I might have gone down would have been medicine, but I've always been terribly, terribly afraid, I should say, of blood, which kind of kills that career.
No, I got you. I got you. You don't want to be throwing up when you're doing your work, for sure.
Bad idea. You just made an incision in somebody and you throw right up.
Yeah.
Talk about horror.
All right. Well, that's how we'll wrap this one up, with vomiting. All right.
Thank you.
Dr. Rahul Prasad, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been very enlightening.
Thank you so much, Shane, for having me. It's been a blast.